So what an unusual time to be a student at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary and at Level College. Um, right now, man, I'm hoping as you're watching this that you're in a safe place, that the storm has not harmed or injured you. I pray the Lord has provided protection for you and your family. I pray all is well. And even if there have been some things that have happened and that have been ideal in the midst of this storm and COVID and Afghanistan and all the other things, I invite us to remember that the Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thy rod, thy staff, they comfort me. May we remember, even in the midst of the darkest time, we still have a very good shepherd. And because of him, our soul is well. So I just want to give us that reminder. So I've also extended the deadlines for the quiz, but also extended the deadline for the iSearch proposal, just because I want to make space for if there's been things that have kind of interrupted. I know in some parts of Louisiana and even in New Orleans, there's not power. So I just want to give you opportunity. And if by the time the deadline closes and you're not able to respond, you're not able to take the quiz, you're not able to do the iSearch, let me know. Shoot me an email, because we're just in a very unique time, and I don't want outside circumstances to hinder you. And there are things you just can't control. So shoot me an email, let me know, we'll try to get through this as best we can. But anyway, so as we kind of continue, we're in chapter 2 of our book. Talk about theories of development. Play that. Theories of development. So it's important for us to know that theories are important. Now we know that theories aren't exactly facts, but theories are helpful because they help us kind of organize things. I know we all have our theories about certain things. If you look at the example in our book of the case study, just think about that for a minute. What would be your theory? What is the reason for the child's behavior, thoughts, life circumstances? What's the reason? We all have our theories, and it's helpful for us sometimes. We can think about those things, but theories just help us to organize things. If we think about all the data that kind of comes in, even as we think about human development, there's so many things to consider inside of human development. And so many things to consider inside of human development. So theories just help us kind of organize these things. Not saying they're always true, but it just helps us to organize. So we're going to talk about a number of different theories that some are a little bit more advanced than others, some are a little bit more elaborate than others, but they all have an idea that can help us kind of capture certain things about development that we can look at. We may not buy into all of them, but we can say, okay, they're important for us to know about. So first one, we got psychoanalytic theory. So we've talked about Freud just a little bit because Freud is known as the father of modern psychology. And Freud has ideas of what he thinks that happens as a person develops. And he's linked this to psychoanalytic theory. So we can see, looking at Freud, look at that picture over here, that Freud focuses a lot on the preconscious and unconscious. So he talks about the mind, the personality is broken into 3 distinct parts. We have the id, This is more your distinctive desires. It strives to secure pleasure. It's all about getting pleasure. It operates on what they call the pleasure principle. It's selfish. We talked about this in our first lecture, that the id is selfish and it's akin to what we know as fallen nature because it's only seeking the things of the flesh. Then you got the ego. The ego is trying that mediator, that thing that goes in between the ego, the in between the id and the superego. It's the rational part. It tries to keep the person in touch with reality. But then you got the superego. The superego, it's kind of like the conscience, and it kind of differentiate between like right and wrong. But the issue is that the id and the superego are going at it with each other. They have conflicts, and the ego has to be that thing that kind of sits in the middle, tries to keep the peace. Tries to keep the peace. So Freud is saying, as you think about development, you want to think about, man, the unconscious and the preconscious, they impact a person's behavior, and the id, ego, and superego influence how a person is going to act. Thinking about, he's thinking a lot about this unconscious here. Freud has what we call defense mechanisms. So defense mechanisms, so he's saying this is the way that unconsciously your body handles and your mind handles anxiety. Those things that you have this anxiety, you may have this motive, you may have this desire that may not be socially acceptable, and you may repress it, or you may try to compensate, or you may try to rationalize it. He's saying that there's this tension going on inside yourself. Once again, thinking about this in a sense of just human development, this is how he's seeing people. People have these innate desires. What you're going to see through age, you probably already seen the book, is that Freud focuses a lot on the unconscious, but he also focuses a lot on like sexual instincts and sexual repression and different things like that. And think about it, Freud grew up in a time, because one of the things we think about theories, we think about theorists, we think about where they grew up in a time where there was a lot of secrecy. There was a lot of not talking about things. So if we think about Freud and thinking about the context that he grew up in, his theory makes sense for him. Why he would come up with this, because of the setting that he grew up in. But it's focused on a lot of like that sexual thing. What you see in the book is called that libido, that sexual energy. He focuses a lot on those things. And even to the point, go back out of here, to the point that Freud has what you call the psychosexual stages. So he has these stages that he says all people kind of go through. And you can hear them. They're all linked to some type of pleasure. They're all linked to pleasure points inside of the body. They're linked to the phallic, the anal, the genital. Like he's saying at certain points in time, like people have different points of pleasure, different parts of their body they find the most pleasure in. You hear that? There's a lot of like that id coming out, that pleasure. But this is what he's saying. He's saying that people go through these psychosexual stages. Now, guys, we would look at Freud and we'd be like, Freud, it's not all about sex. It's not all about sex. We would look at him and say those things. And we would know those things as believers. We know people are a little bit more complex than that. But we got to understand at the time, like, Freud was trying to explain the actions and the motives of people. But we would look at that and we would know that, yes, we would agree. There's sin within men. He wouldn't term it that way, but we would know that sin within men, there are these desires, these things that we have in us that are of the flesh. So we would agree with that. Now, where Freud goes with that, we would disagree, but this is what he's thinking. This is how he thinks people go through these psychosexual stages. So then we get to Erikson. So Erikson was actually, he worked with Freud's daughter, Anna Freud. So he's influenced by Freud and psychoanalytic theory, but he comes up with psychosocial theory. And psychosocial, when he means like that, there's some type of identity crisis at each point in life. And you'll also see, so Freud's psychosexual stages only go up so far, about 12 or so. But if you go on up to Erikson, his go all the way up to death, and we'll see that. So it's a little bit more expansive. But one of the things we also notice is that inside of Erikson's theory is that he's thinking a lot more how people interact with their environment and a lot more how relationships affect their behavior and identity development. Um, so look, he has these 8 stages. Excuse me, guys. I'm trying to get it together over here. All right. All right. 1, 2, 3. All right. So he has these 8 stages that people go through, and each stage has a significant relationship, this psychosocial crisis, this identity development that can have a potential negative outcome or positive outcome. And there's disagreement on like the age and stages, even among contemporaries. So you think about it. Erikson's he was new with his like theory. We were saying, hey man, this is very important. But as time is going on, people found out more things about development. They may be like, they would argue, okay, maybe it's not at this stage, maybe it's not at this age that he would talk about some of those things. But look at this. These are the stages that we've kind of learned about in our book, where it started at infancy, that early childhood, early school age, middle childhood, adolescence. But look at this. He's got ages, but he's also got these developmental crises that each person kind of goes through. The trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubting, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk about those in a little bit more depth and just as we're coming up here. So the first one, we got infancy. Just making sure I get up. All right. So the first one we have is infancy. So this is from birth to 2, and we got this thing of like trust versus mistrust. This child is very new to the world. They're trying to figure out, is this a safe place? Is this not a safe place? Can I trust or have mistrust? And it's coming back to like the environmental influences, like the mother. In the early stages, the mother is the person that's interacting with the child a lot, and how the mother interacts influences whether the child trusts the external environment, trusts the world, or the mistrust of the world. Whether the child develops like this hope or not. I remember a story of a serial bomber back in the day, and he had at a young age, maybe about like 3 to 6 months, he had this allergy, and because of his allergy, he couldn't interact with people, and he had to be very isolated. Particularly, he couldn't interact with his mother. His mother couldn't hold him, couldn't take care of him, couldn't feed him, couldn't touch his skin because he had just a really bad allergy. And they did a case study on it and looked back, and before he went into this isolation, he was a very friendly and kind of bubbly kid. But after it, he was just cold, and he went on to become like, a serial bomber. But that's just something to consider, that, man, that a child's interaction with particularly just their mother can help them determine, man, whether they trust the world or they don't trust the world. Going next into like early childhood, you got 1 to 3. This child is beginning to taking care of themselves. They're beginning to, potty train and dress themselves. They can do a lot of things by themselves. They begin to develop this kind of autonomy. And the parents can either encourage this, and they can become more autonomous, or they can shame them, or they can have these negative influences and not cheer them on, and they have this shame and this doubt about themselves. This is Eric. Erik's just thinking about, once again, how significant people, significant relationships impact a person's developmental stages. Think about this. Look, he even said developmental influences is both the parents or adult substitutes, and that psychological strength. The thing they develop is willpower. Once you get that autonomy, man, you got some willpower. You realize that you have some grit. You start to trust yourself a little bit more. All right. We got initiative versus guilt. Final fact, once again, look at the environmental factors. This is parents family, friends, psychological strength, its purpose. And I'm not going to go through all these in depth just for the sake of time. Industry versus inferiority. This person's in school. They're trying to learn a little bit more. They're trying to put in a little bit more work because they find themselves, hey, I'm in work. I'm in school. I'm putting in work. I'm in athletics and I'm doing well. They develop this industry. But if that's not the case, then they develop this feeling of inferiority. This is what happens if a kid comes home and, man, they got mostly D's or F's and different things like that. They're feeling very inferior because of what happens at school. Or maybe they tried to play sports and their sport, they just hadn't got it. It just hadn't happened for them. Inferiority. Instead of feeling that, man, if I get the A's or the B's, I'm feeling industrious. I'm feeling like, man, I can do some things. I'm feeling competent. And during this time, school is a major influencer here. So now we're getting on up and we're getting the identity versus identity confusion. So remember, as we talked about, like these stages of, young adulthood and people are developing like identity. A very important thing, Erickson said, this stage, like they're trying to figure out who are you? Who are you? And during that time, guess whose the influences are? It's their peers. They're looking around. What are their peers saying? What are their peers doing? And they're basing themselves on like what their identity is off their peers and who they hang out with. So as you think about the Bible does tell us bad company ruins good morals. The people that we're around, it affects us. In other words. Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. So you got 1825. So okay, we're either I'm intimate with people, I'm isolated. Who's impacting this stage is partner, spouse, friends, and that psychological strength they're developing is love. Once again, as we're thinking about this, the person that develops on this positive side, this positive aspect of it, they're developing this psychological strength. Now we're getting a little bit more on up in age. So we got 25 to 65. Yes, there's kind of big gaps there, but it's but that person is getting a little bit more like think about, man, how do I get involved in community? What do I do? How do I invest in other things? Like thinking about society. How do I be a productive member? So family and society kind of influences this, and they're starting to care about others and care about parents at this stage, and take care of parents at this stage sometimes. And if they get outside of general utility, they're developing some care for each other, care for people. And then you got that last stage, and there's some more other people who've kind of added a little bit more to that, but we're not going to talk about that today because it's not in our book. Is 65 and older, you're getting older. You're like, man, integrity or despair. That's just like, man, I've done my best. I've ran the race. Either I've been faithful. This is just using this Christian terminology. Or, man, I'm despairing because I'm regretting all the things I didn't get to do. One influence is all human. Think about this. You look at, think about this, and we look at how in Erickson's stages, it's about this relationship. These relational things are being involved. These relational things that start shaping development. So think about this as we go back to that term that we used in the first lecture, the reciprocating self. That we are made unique, but in that we're made unique, but we're also made to be in close relationship with people, and our relationship with people affect us, and close relationship with people helps us reflect who God is. That you can see that in all of Erickson's stages. You can see, man, if there's a relationship can impact a person, whether they develop negatively or positively in these stages. Psychological strength and wisdom. And we got the cognitive developmental approach. So this is more like, man, thinking about the cognitive process. This is John Piaget. So Piaget, man, you're gonna hear him a lot as you think about just development, because he's talking about as children are developing, what can their mind grasp? What can they understand at certain levels? Or yeah, how do they comprehend certain things? You'll see that in its stages how they're thinking, how they comprehend it. So now we got sensory motor. So first he's starting and he goes from like start at birth to 2. So sensory motor, a lot of their thinking, what can grasp is based on their senses. Then you got pre-operation. They're not capable like formal operations. They're not capable like higher adult like thinking, cognitive or executive thinking. They're unable to reverse certain things, to mentally reverse actions. They're unable to like trace it back to like certain. All right, this is how this happened. From 2 to 7. Then you got concrete operation. That's logical thought. It's just concrete situation involving real object. There's like, all right, if you're teaching me about the tree, I need to see a tree. But if you're teaching about the tree of life, they will be like, oh, that's I can't get it. I can't get it because there's not that sense of this real object in front of them for them to see. And then 11 plus, and then you got logical thoughts apply, abstract concepts, starting to think a little bit more logically. They can start thinking about the tree of life a little bit more. And they can see that some symbols are real. They can look at the communion and say, okay, I understand this blood is because of Jesus. This body is because of Jesus. Or this cracker, or however you do it in your church. And so one of the things, all right, technology, it works sometimes. All right, so as you think about Piaget and his theory, it's a sense of how our minds are. First, we start to try to organize some of these things, but in order for to organize it, man, sometimes it starts with that adaptation. Then we go to assimilation and accommodation. So assimilation, changing new information to fit what's already understood. And accommodation, internal thought structures are changed to fit new information. And so, just to give an example, you got the child who first learned, okay, dog. Four-legged animal is dog. So, and the parent tells them, all right, dog. So they see a four-legged animal and say, dog. That's them assimilating to be like, all right, this is dog. This is a new thing. I'm developing this scheme, this ideal. What is a dog? A dog is a four-legged creature. They're developing that. But then they see another four-legged animal. It's a cow. But the kid calls the cow a doggy. See, the kid is now having this thing. Now we got to go to accommodation. We got to accommodate because mommy and daddy has to tell him, hey, I know it has 4 legs, but this is actually a cow. So trying to accommodate, not want to call it a doggy. So because the child had this scheme, this idea in his mind, dog is a 4-legged creature, but now it sees a cow, and we got to accommodate for that. We got to say no. Hey, we got to change it around. We got to move further than that. Cultural framework approach. So this is by Lev Vygotsky. So basically what he's just trying to say is that in order for us to all right. These 4 principles. So children construct their knowledge, and development can't be understood outside of a person's social context. So as we think about that, we talked about culture. We talked about cultural development. And we talked about the biopsychosocial kind of model. And we want to consider as a personal development, we want to consider that social context. So Lev Vygotsky, like he's saying, hey, if you want to understand the person, you want to understand development, you can't do it outside of understanding what's this person's social context. And learning can lead to development. So what they learn can take them further. But also language plays a key role in mental development. Zone or proximal development. So this is the idea that, that distance between, what a kid can do and what they need a little bit of help doing. So look at this picture. You see, okay, the kid has the reach already, has some reach, but he needs just that teacher to help him just a little bit because he understand how high, the teacher understands how high you can get. So the way they say it is that the distance between the child's actual development level and a higher level of potential development with adult guidance or that of more capable peers. So it's like that kid who man, is trying to take that one step. And they take that one step, then they try to take that other step. But then by the third step, they're getting a little wobbly. They're almost about to get there. And they're about to make it, but they're about to fall, and now you realize, all right, this is where I need to step in. The first two steps they got. The third step, they're a little shaky on that. That's that zone of kind of proximal development. That's the difference between what the kid do and what the person can do. Classical conditioning. So having Pavlov, what you call a behaviorist, he's just saying, hey, you can condition somebody to do certain things. Classical conditioning, we see that, I mean, he had the famous experience, Pavlov's dog, and how every time this bell rang, ding, he would pair it with food. Because we know, like, dogs just see food and they start salivating. But then he said he rang the bell, gave him food. Rang the bell, gave him food. Rang the bell, gave him food. But then just rang the bell. And we see that now there is a conditioned response. The dog is conditioned to respond. He's conditioned to respond to the bell. He conditioned to salivate because in his mind, he's been trained that when this bell comes, that means food comes. So Ivan Pavlov, just thinking about classical conditioning, how people are conditioned to certain things. And classical conditioning is just like how we're pairing a neutral stimulus, which is a bell, to like unconditional stimulus. Like he's already salivating to the food. We're just putting in like this neutral stimulus here. The behavioral approach. So still the behaviorist, B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is known for operant conditioning. So operant conditioning is a little different from like classical conditioning. Operant conditioning is like you're seeing a behavior that already occurs and you're trying to reward it. Or you're trying to, you're seeing a behavior that already occurred and you're trying to reward it. You're trying to reinforce it. Look at this. Terrell smiles, accidental response. Father picks him up to reinforce it. So Terrell keeps smiling because he's like, man, I smiled at one time. Now my dad picked me up. If I smile again, he's going to keep picking me up. I give you an example. My 4-year-old is that when she goes to the potty, I give her M&M. And guess what? She tries to keep going to the potty because she wants that M&M. We try to reinforce that behavior of her going to the potty by herself with an M&M. Called positive reinforcement. But Skinner argued that environments, parents, teachers, peers reacts to our behaviors and either reinforces or eliminates that behavior. Because if a behavior occurs but is not reinforced, it's likely that behavior may be extinct or extinguished. We're talking about that like that. So that positive reinforcement, that's me rewarding. Like I'm rewarding that child rewarding the child for the behavior. But a negative thing is like it's unpleasantly removed when desired behavior. So that sense of like, man, I made this bad example, but it's that sense of like, man, when I was a child, I would want my sister when she grabbed one of my M&Ms, like I would grab her wrist and just say, hey, let go of my M&M, please. Let go of my M&Ms to try to show her that. But that's the sense of like, all right, that's that negative reinforcer until like I get desired behavior. Once she let go of my M&Ms, I let go of her arm. Negative reinforcer. Punishment is like just a definite when something bad happens. All right, we're punishing it right then and there. Extinction. So that's that sense of like, man, if it's no longer, it's a stimulus is no longer there. So that sense of like going back to my daughter, if I'm trying to get her to go to the potty and every time she goes to the potty, she gets an M&M, like, okay, she's like, hey, I'm going and getting the M&M, going and getting the M&M. But once I stop giving her that M&M, sometimes it's likely that she'll stop telling me she needs to go to the potty. She'll stop going to the potty by herself. She'll stop telling me she has to go potty. because the behavior was no longer reinforced with an M&M. Social cognitive, so Albert Bandura. So Albert Bandura, so not a so learning occurs through observation and imitation. So he did this experiment with the Bobo doll, where he just had a kid like watch somebody like beat this doll and different things like that. And guess what? The kid went there, he started hitting the doll, because it's a sense of he's saying, hey, when we're thinking about development, you're thinking about that kids or people are looking at what's around them, and when they're looking at what's around them, that's what they're going to end up doing. Like, so it's observational learning, so people learn from others, and that the information we get from other people, things, and events influence the way we act. Because if I see somebody do certain things, like, I'm gonna start to act like that. It's interesting. I was working with a person one time, and they said that their parent would always go into this deep, dark, depressive place and start to demean and belittle themselves when something bad happened. But then I talked to them, and I noticed that they did the exact same thing. And we make sense of that by they saw mom do that, so they do it now, because observations matter. Observations matter. But yeah, so if kids witness undesired behaviors, like Bandura's gonna say, they're gonna start doing it. But if they see positive behavior, they're gonna start doing it too. So bioecological model, Bronfenbrenner. That's how you say that, Bronfenbrenner theory. So Bronfenbrenner really just talks about how when we think about our development, we all think about in systems. In systems. So go to this chart. So you think about it, that individual microsystem, these are your immediate family, like your school, maybe even your church. No, not your church yet. But got some individual things that kind of like impacting you in this microsystem. You got extended system, the exosystem. You still got like and even you go just even broader, like society. So basically, you think about development through this lens. Bronfenbrenner's getting a little bit more expansive. He's talking about, man, individual things. There's immediate family, there's church, and there's society. Like he's branching out a little bit more to think about, man, human development is very complex because there are a number of factors that impact it, a number of systems that impact it, which is good for us to know as we think about human development. Like sometimes we can think about it, we got our theories, and we're like, man, sometimes it's just a one-to-one, right? No. People are very complex, and in order for us to understand people, the people that we're ministering to or hope to minister to one day, is that we have to understand, man, they are influenced by a number of different things. And I think Bronfenbrenner, as he think about this theory, like he branches out just a little bit, a lot more. And even as believers, we have to take into consideration, man, society and all these things, but even got to think about just the Holy Spirit and Christian culture and God, how he influences these things. That yes, a person may have experienced these things, but at the end of the day, the Lord working in them can actually make them develop a whole different thing. So that's just that complexity. I'm not here to give you answers, but I'm just saying, man, men are very complex. Believers are very complex. To say that when we think about their one-to-one, this may not be that all the time. Developmental theory. So now we're thinking about the future and what's kind of happening now. So now developmental theory is getting a little bit more expansive. So we go back to Freud. We think about Freud was just like on the unconscious. We think about Erikson, he's getting to the psychosocial and different things like that. But now, man, we think about developmental theories. They're getting a little bit more expansive. Talking about, man, genetics. So that's your nature right there. Neural. So what's going on in your brain? The behavior. Like, what are you doing? Environments. Your environmental. Like thinking about all these things. So we're thinking about a more expansive, like human developmental theory. So they're thinking about, man, these how your genes, how you are raised, how your brain functions. What are things that you're doing? What are things you observed that people doing? What's your environment? Where you grow up at? All these things are very important as we consider developmental. And developmental systems theory, it's one of the things we're not going to talk about that. And life course theory, also not. I'm going to let you guys read that. Evolutionary developmental psychology, based on like Darwin's principle. Of course, we can have some debate and some talk about that, but one of the things we want to consider inside of human development, there are a number of theories. inside human development, there are a number of theories. And we as believers, but also we as I'm taking this very integrative approach, I think we can see that each theory has particular interesting things about it and things we can say, okay, maybe there's some truth in there, some value in it, but we can't just go all in and say I'm throwing all myself in here, because at the end of the day, we think about humans are very complex. When we think about human development, we have these categories, we have these theories that are helpful, and they can help us organize some things. But at the end of the day, we have to say, okay, men are very complex because they're made in the image of God. They're impacted by sin. And once they be redeemed by Jesus, the Holy Spirit works inside them and causes them to develop in what we call sanctification in ways that are incomprehensible, in ways that we can't completely understand. All we have is theories about that. So those are just things to kind of consider. So, guys, I just want to tell you once again, I hope you're safe. If you have any questions about some of these things, or some of these things are unclear, man, shoot me an email, let me know. And yeah, until next time, hopefully we'll be in a different setting back in New Orleans. But yeah, I pray all is well with you guys. And guys, if I can help you, is there anything you need from me, please let me know.